In example 5, we can see that we're going to be considering the data set of prices that people said they would be willing to pay for a nice dinner. Okay, hopefully this isn't like a dinner for two, like a date or something like that, or you really gotta hand it to the person who's only willing to shell out 11 bucks. That's like a McDonald's date there. I mean, 108's nice. Not too bad, but okay. Let's take a look at these data values that we have and start to see, would we consider any of these data values an outlier? Well, we can kind of see that 108 is a very large data value, but the question that we have is it too large? Is it far removed? This is never something that we are able to just eyeball. You can't do that. But we can construct these lower and upper boundaries to get a sense of how the data set is kind of arranged, and ultimately if 108 or one of these other values is too far away from the others. So again, if I want to go ahead and see how to compute these lower and upper boundaries, I recognize that I need to be able to find Q1, Q3, and the IQR, which remember was just Q3 minus Q1. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my calculator and enter these values into a list so I can find my different quartile values. So if I flip over here to my calculator, and I go to Stat and to Edit, you can see that I've already entered in all of these data values. I suggest that you go ahead right now, pause the video, so you can enter your data values in and follow along. Okay, so if you've already inserted all of these values, remember that you can go ahead and click on my Stat button, over to the Calculate menu, 1var Stats, and just make sure that you've selected the appropriate list. Down here, you remember that our values of the quartiles are near the bottom, and you can just hit the down arrow in order to go ahead and see all those different numbers. So Q1 is 22, Q3 is 55.5, which I believe makes the IQR, which is the difference of those two, 33.5. So I'm going to go ahead and write those down here. So I have Q1 was equal to 22. Notice that's dollars. Q3, that was equal to $55.5, and that would make my IQR, which is the difference of those, $33.5. Okay, so now I can go ahead and I can start to compute my lower boundary and my upper boundary. So let's see, lower boundary. For my lower boundary, following the formula that I have up above, I'm going to need to take Q1 and subtract 1.5 times my IQR. So that would be taking $22 minus whatever 1.5 is when multiplied to 33.5. Now I'm just going to use my calculator to go ahead and crunch this out. So let's see, I'll just go back to my main screen here. I'm going to do 22 minus 1.5 times 33.5. So notice here I get a negative value. That's totally fine. There's no problem with this. Negative 28.25. So I have negative 28.25. That's a lower boundary. I'm going to go ahead and kind of mark out how this actually looks on a little number line over here at the side. So if my data is kind of lined up over here, what I have now is a lower bound of negative 28.5. If anything falls lower than this, if there's any number in my data set that's beneath this value, it's too low and will be considered an outlier. But obviously I don't have any values here that are in the negatives, so it doesn't seem like any number here is too low. Could any number be too high? Well, let's try to find the upper boundary. So let's see. For my upper boundary, I calculate Q3, this time plus 1.5 times the IQR. That's going to turn into, let's see, Q3 was my 55.5. And I'm going to add to that 1.5 times my IQR. Okay, so seeing what the calculator tells me, I'm going to get 55.5 plus 1.5 times 33.5. I get 105.75. So I have another value here, 105.75, and I can put that down. So again, any value now that falls in between these two bounds Any value that's in between these are okay values. But any values that fall outside are going to be considered outliers, whether they're on the high side or the low side. It doesn't matter. And so do we have any values in our data set that is an outlier? Well, yep, we can definitely see that the value of 108 would fall somewhere over here. And so we can see $108 is an outlier. It falls above that upper bound. So this is an easy way for us to determine outliers at really any given point that we wish. We just have to compute these lower and upper boundaries once I have my data set.